Most people will focus on, I want this color because that's this year's Pantone or that's the latest wallpaper or whatever. We don't talk about how we feel in these spaces. How can environments be designed also that we can enjoy them more and have a different perception of time when we were in them? The most fascinating thing was when my clients started sending me photographs of tomatoes. They had tomatoes with 1.3 kilos, one tomato, which was a little bit crazy. So yeah, things like that can be designed as well.
And no pesticides or anything.
Wow, there's like some really cool stuff around us in our daily life that we don't take enough time to appreciate.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Many Firsts, the podcast where we explore the power of first-time experiences and share transformative and inspirational moments in our lives. I'm your host, Regula Fischer, and I'm super happy to be here today live in the studio with Teresa Vitoria. Welcome, Teresa.
Hi, Reggie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. How has your day been so far?
Oh, usual, busy, working, and it's nice to end the day with a nice conversation with you.
Nice conversation about many firsts, and I know you have some to share. So just to give everyone a quick idea of some of the things you have done in life. So you are a visionary interior designer and the founder of Alchemya. And in your work, you combine biogeometry, neuroscience, and design. And you create spaces that foster well-being, creativity, and harmony. And you're also a woman living her second life. That's how I got to know you.
Exactly.
And that's where I found I need to talk to this woman and we should learn from her, because I think what you said is I'm living my second life and I'm in awe with life. It sounded to me like not just once or twice, but that's a general feeling you have inside of you now. And I found that so beautiful, and it came across with such an energy that I would like to start right there. So your second life, would you like to take us on the journey and share with us?
I could say so many things. So very briefly, at the end of 2019, I had a very big life change, and and how we just tend to live our lives, just take things for granted. And my life suddenly got turned upside down, and I'm a super positive person, and so I thought, oh, wait a minute, wow, I'm 53 years old. I can still do some interesting things and do some different things. So one of the first things was the experience of living by myself on my own at the age of 53. I'd never done that. I'd never even thought about that. So that was interesting. And then just from there, the many things that I've done in the last 4 or 5 years, like from I've been doing interior design since 2002, and during COVID and during lockdowns and all that stuff, I sort of lost a little bit of purpose in my work, and we all had loads of time to go into deep dive into different things, and I've always been super interested in neuroscience. So I started, reading and did a few courses and stuff, and just thought, oh, wait a minute, wow, there's a bunch of principles here that I can actually apply to interior design. And, would it be cool to design, spaces with a purposed outcome? So that was one of the firsts, and then I studied biogeometry after that, and then just combining all of those together with interior design to do a project that's a little bit different from what I'd done up until now. So that was one thing. But I think, in terms of firsts, this thing of looking at it as, living a second life has been just like living in awe. Like I was telling you, I just feel like every day, like the simplest things, I'm just in awe of these things that I never thought that I'd either do or experience, or even just, just looking at things in a very simple way, and just things that when we get caught up in life, we're always like rushing around doing stuff. And then actually when we have a little bit more time on our hands, just stopping and saying, wow, there's like some really cool stuff around us in our daily life that we don't take enough time to appreciate.
And what do you think brought that shift in you, you know, because these things were probably there also before, but the awe wasn't there that much.
Interesting.
Is it living alone that makes the difference? No, I'm just joking.
No. Living alone is a different experience. It's neither better nor worse. It's a different experience, very different experience. But it's allowed me, obviously, to have more time because I have 3 children who are wonderful and amazing. I'm very lucky because they also live here in Lisbon, but they're grown up, you know, and they have their own lives, and so I have like enough free time in my free time to just do things and, you know, like not have to think, you know, that I have to be according to somebody else's schedule or like somebody else's plans. And so all of a sudden it's like, you know, just to give you an example, my children gave me for Mother's Day last year a paragliding experience, whatever. And it took me like a while to sort of like, I just, you know, put it away and I didn't think about it. And then one day I get a call from this instructor. He says, "Hi, you know, it's just to let you know, it's like a great day to fly today." And I was actually in a dress in my car going to work. And I thought, oh, hold on, I've got my gym stuff in the boot of the car. I can quickly change and go paragliding, which I'd never done. And it was a little bit terrifying. And, you know, just little things like that, which are things that just I'd never thought that I'd do.
And the fact that you're able to do you think in the past you would have stopped yourself from doing that, or how is the difference?
I wouldn't have stopped. It's just you have a different type of focus. You know, I was just, you know, my focus was around my family life, and so, you know, this thing of always being ready for others and organizing things focused mainly on others and not, you know, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, hold on, it's just me. So I'm going to focus on, you know, what makes me happy and things that I can do and, you know, so many different things.
You know what I find fascinating? You're saying it like that, and I think it's a struggle. And if I may say so, even if it's generalizing or typical, but we say that women, and I'm sure it's true that especially if you're the one that's taking care of a family, that it is difficult, right, to really prioritize what I want to do. And did you struggle with that, or was it like a quick transition for you?
No, I mean, for me personally, I was living outside of Lisbon, so I was living about an hour away from Lisbon, and I've always wanted to live in the city center, but things were just organized in a different way, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, I can just live in Lisbon, and that was just like, you know, it took me like 2 minutes to make that decision. We wouldn't be sitting here. We would not have met if I had not taken that decision. Yeah, so it's
no doubts. You felt that's what you want to do, and you went.
Yeah, no doubts. Yeah.
Very nice. I'm so happy, and I can see how much energy that brings to your life. And I guess probably after starting to understand how these experiences are, then you probably think, okay, then let's do more, right? Or
no, absolutely. It's just this thing of, you know, some people, you know, just tend to, I'm a very positive person. So it's like, oh, you know, wow, you know, you wake up in the morning and, you know, if it's on the weekends, like what's going to happen today? And it's just, I think we don't do enough things, you know, enough new things and experience things that are so easily available around us and that we don't, you know, we don't
see, as you said, I think, or appreciate you. Yeah,
some, you know, simple things. So I'm all about, you know, appreciating. I'm super appreciative of the simple things in life, and you know, not going into so many materialistic things, but more about the simple things that we have so readily available. But we forget, you know, we get caught up in all this modern, you know, all these stuff and things, and when there's many other things that, you know, even bring us so much inspiration for our work, for, you know, for everything. It's
interesting. Also in terms of your work, right? If you mention materialistic and so on, let's dive a bit into that, because interior design, and I may be wrong, I'm happy to learn from you and be inspired, has to do with things, I would assume. So how does that go?
Yeah, exactly.
together?
So that's how this I changed sort of my focus in terms of interior design. So during COVID and during one of the lockdown, I think it was the second lockdown, I was already living by myself at that time, and it was just everything didn't. It was 20 years of doing the work in the same way, and I'm very incredibly appreciative of all the clients that I've had, and so many incredible, spectacular projects in so many different places. But it's like, it's things, and yes, you can focus on, on things like art and, things like that I have a passion for, and, incorporating things like that into projects, and the creativity and all of that. But then it's, it's things and things and things. And so this is when I was just reading more, deep diving more into neuroscience, that I thought, hold on, maybe there's other ways to look at the design and how we live in our homes. And I think it's also the experience of living on my own and coming from, so I moved from a very big house into a 1-bedroom apartment, and which is lovely, but it was a big exercise for me. So it's like, what was important to me at that time, what were the things that I wanted to have in my new home, what would give that meaning. And so, and it's like, it's always a fraction of what we already own. And then that got me just more into thinking, okay, so what really makes us happy in our home? What are the things that make us happy in our home? And then how do we live in our home? How do we experience living in our home? And whereas, most people will focus on, I want this color because that's this year's Pantone, or that's the latest wallpaper, or whatever. Does that really make us happy? Are we doing that for ourselves or for others? So experiencing the home as something that can bring us well-being seems to me a little bit more of an interesting approach, and something worth just exploring a little bit more.
Oh yeah, I think that's so interesting, and I do believe that we get influenced. Our well-being gets influenced by our surroundings, right? So totally. I do hope we have a surrounding here that
the surrounding is lovely.
A good impact on your well-being.
The surroundings are Dublin. We have lovely green plants, which is one of the best things that we can have in our environment. But there's so many things, it's scientifically proven that if you live in a messy environment, you are much more likely to cross a red line and to do something that is not so correct or legal or something. So there's so many little things. But then it's so many things. It's colors. It's sound. It's temperature. There's so many, when we go into all the senses and how that impacts how we experience the home, then all of a sudden we start thinking about it in a different way rather than just the visual. So it's more, there's so many of these invisible things that we don't think about that we can incorporate into the design that will impact how we experience living in our home. And when I say our home, I mean it can be like, imagine if it's an office and if it's designed so that people either are more creative, or the environment is so subtly welcoming that they look forward to going into the work environment rather than just looking at their watch to go home. Or it can be a mediation room where it's designed so that people are predisposed to agreement and to positive exchange and to positive outcomes, things like that. So,
that's so inspirational. And I'm wondering what crosses your mind when you look, or did you have such a moment when you were looking back at how you yourself have lived in your environments before and after that?
Yeah.
And how is that different? Could you share?
How it's different. I've always sort of like the homes I've had before, especially like the main living home, always designed in a way that would make me happy, but, or me and myself and my family happy. But, I didn't really go into that sort of detail before. And it's funny because I think my houses before were much more magazine worthy, much more, by the book in a way, and just more like, designed per se, visually designed. Whereas now they're a little bit more like randomly designed. I mean, somebody might look at it and say like, why did you put that there or this here or whatever? But for me, it makes sense in terms of how it influences the energy of a space. So
I can imagine. I mean, I see these glossy magazines with these design images, and I would be curious to see more of the spaces you create. You mentioned, I'm glad you also said offices, because you were talking about home, right? One of my questions would have been, so home is of course very profound, right? It's not just where we live, but home also has this meaning of that's where we really, that's just the space where we feel good, right? And probably where we can forget about time and everything. And that can also be when we work, of course. So it makes a lot of sense. You mentioned neuroscience and biogeometry. But can you elaborate a bit more on how, because I mean, neuroscience is about the brain, right? So,
well, our brain reacts to our senses. Okay.
Yeah.
So touch, smell, how we feel, temperature, sound, all sorts of different things. All these things have influence on how our brain reacts and how we react to our environment. So our brain is always, reacting to our environment. So does our environment make us feel welcomed and comfortable? Does it make us alert? Does it make us be on the edge? There's these things. So designing from a point of view where, like, designing a bedroom, for example, in a way that, promotes better sleep or, a more relaxed environment, rather than doing, an orange wall behind your headboard, or you wake up in the morning and you see like a bright green something, I don't know. So designing in ways that your brain reacts in a different way to what the purpose of that room should be.
That's so relevant. If I'm just thinking about today's world, right, and all the mental health challenges that we're facing at times, or also in health in general. So but then there's of course also nature, right, which we also influence that at times by designing it. But
nature as well. I mean, in terms of I just want to go back to one thing that you said, which is how you said something just before about our environment and how I think you said something about perceived time. So that's also something interesting, because, designing environments, that's something I'm just getting into, is designing environments which change our perception of time. Because we have, all this thing of saying, like, we all say, how did my week fly by so quickly? How did the weekend fly by so quickly? It's already like time to go to bed again. So how can environments be designed also that, we can enjoy them more and have a different perception of time when we're in them? So that's something else.
That's so fast. And is that then the biogeometry?
Yeah, it's just different. It's just combined. It's a lot of different little things combined together. But, it's just designing for that outcome of, for that outcome of how we, it's just all about experience and how we experience the environment around us, and how that can be, for me, it's interesting if it can bring well-being to the person using or living in the space. I think that's where it becomes, more worthwhile developing a little bit more to get a better outcome in terms of well-being.
And can you share one or two examples of outcomes that you have seen and that I would assume are very fulfilling for you also in your work, right?
I'll talk about it. You were just mentioning it. You were going to mention nature. I could talk about so many different things. So you could you just mentioned nature.
Oh yeah, we want to do nature. Let's do nature first. And then we go, or you choose which one first. That's so, now Alchemya.
So I've been working on this incredible project since December last year in the south of Sweden, in the main farm land area of Sweden, with a client of mine who's been a client of mine. We met more than 20 years ago. She's one of my first clients. And we didn't see each other for a few years, and then randomly met again here in Lisbon last year. And she invited me to participate in a project that she was starting with her husband, and it was this farm. And she said, oh, there's so many things that we could, we need you to participate in. And I'm like, okay, sure, fun. I love Sweden. So got up there, minus 20 degrees, and very little sunlight in December.
Influence of the environment, yes.
And there was many things to assess, but one of the things I guess I'll just talk about one of the things, which is the nature. And so one of the first things that I needed to work on in December was just sort of planning what was going to happen in the spring for planting and the harvest and all of that stuff. So they had just set up this amazing old greenhouse that they had received and they had reassembled on the land. And there was all this land in front of the greenhouse to be developed in terms of growing stuff. They also own a restaurant, so they wanted to grow their own vegetables to supply the restaurant and all this stuff. So it was the perfect time sort of like for me to like go in there and just think about it. So what I designed for them was so I designed this layout of growing beds in front of the greenhouse, which were mainly based on geometrical patterns, which I designed after assessing the quality of the energy already existing on the land, and then working with that and working with the positioning of these growing beds, and that whole pattern formed by the several growing beds in terms of the overall design. Anyway, fast forward, I was back there in the spring when everything was being planted, when everything had already been executed, and everything was being planted, working with them on that. And it was just so many things happened from that. So first, like the chickens sort of knew that they couldn't go near the growing beds, which was something I wasn't expecting. Designing things in this way generally allows for not having to use pesticides. And it just has to do with angles and the energy of angles and certain shapes that create the best energy for this to sort of happen. The most fascinating thing was when my client started sending me photographs of tomatoes, and first tomato comes out like 900 grams. And I was like, what? And then
pumpkin almost.
A pumpkin almost, yeah. And then a number of them after that. And then I don't know, sort of like beginning of the summer, they had tomatoes with 1.3 kilos, one tomato, which was a little bit crazy. So yeah, things like that can be designed as well.
And no pesticides or anything.
No.
So is that then the biogeometry is about geometrical forms and shapes?
It's forms and shapes. It's based on ancient Egyptian architecture, but it's a science that works with the quality of the energy in spaces. And it just comes from, this was used thousands of years ago in many places, including Egypt, where, certain angles have a certain energy quality. So, and then combinations of certain patterns and numbers and dimensions all together can create a certain harmonized energy and a higher energy, which allows for things like this, like gigantic tomatoes and
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I what does that do for you and with you if you see such things happen?
I love it. It's fantastic. I mean, it took me a while to sort of embrace it because, it's like it's almost difficult to sort of like believe that this is the, things like this can actually be designed. Things can be designed for these kind of outcomes. But I love it. It's just with this project in Sweden, I worked also on my client's home and in their restaurant as well. And it's just amazing to design things in a way where people can actually feel the impact of it and the benefits of it literally overnight.
Yeah. So Beautiful. And was that also what you wanted to say about nature? Just making sure.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But just but nature also, it's amazing. I love incorporating as much as possible nature into our living environment. So many of us live in apartments, which doesn't make it that easy. But there's always ways. I designed a project here in Lisbon a couple of years ago for a client who didn't have any outdoor space, and we sort of created a space. We created an inner garden. So we sort of built into a bedroom and turned that into a studio. He actually does, podcasts and things like that. So, and he's very creative, but wanted some sort of feel of an outdoor space. So we created an outdoor space within that room, which gives the complete feel of being in a terrace, in a covered terrace. It's completely covered in plants, and it has terracotta on the floor and these beautiful tiles, and all this reflection of the green from the plants, and so that's also possible. So I love as much as possible to bring that in, because nature is what brings us the most connectedness. And so bringing that into design in whatever way. And I mean, if we don't have anything, we always have a wall that we can put an amazing photograph of nature that will inspire us. So there's always many ways to do that.
There's two things you're touching upon here that come to my mind. One is it seems to me like as soon as we start working together, like nature and us human beings, things seem to be falling into place, right? And our well-being increases. And then you mentioned also putting a picture on the wall, like only in that sense, because another thing I was wondering was, okay, I mean, as helpful as such spaces probably are, they come with a cost, right?
Of course.
It's in the end a business. So, is that then something that you can somehow leverage across different budgets, or is it?
Absolutely. And I can tell you that this thing of like, how do we really live in our space? How do we? I was on a podcast a couple of years ago from a program in Brazil, and they were asking me exactly the same thing. They're saying, like, all of our listeners, nobody's got any money to anything with this, and I said, yeah, of course. But then the first thing that most people should be looking at as everything that they have, they probably need to throw half of that stuff out. So it's not about, buying more things or bringing in more things. It's just most of the times it's decluttering.
Yeah.
And it's getting rid of things that really, we don't need, don't serve any purpose. Once we start to declutter, we start having, a broader vision of our space. I love working with, any type of size of space, but when you have a small space, the first thing you need to sort of try to do is how am I going to amplify my visual perception of that space, So decluttering definitely has to be one of those first things, and just placing things in a way that gives us more space. And then, there's other things like, so if you just want to simply change what you already have, just think about, if it's a rainy Saturday in the middle of the winter and you don't want to go out, what do you do that brings you comfort, brings you joy? Is it reading a book? Is it watching TV? Is it listening to music? Is it taking care of your houseplants? Start from that. Is it cooking? Is it, so many different things when we think about what brings us joy. And then start from there. It doesn't have to be about having to buy other things. And then just build up on top of that. So, having, like an amazing plant. There's an amazing exercise to be done, which is like when you wake up in the morning, take care of a living thing. So for those of us who don't have cats and dogs or other pets, it can be a houseplant, it can be an orchid, it can be, something like that, taking care of that first thing in the morning. Just that alone brings just a little bit of connectedness to start our day. So there's so many there's lots of many simple things. I think the issue is that we're all just so overloaded with so many things on social media, on, everything, of so many things to buy. And this is the look this year, and this is this thing, and look at this house, and look at this place, and look at that. And I want that. And I'd love my house to look like that. And I want this, and I want that. We don't talk about how we feel in these spaces rather than how, we look at them. So there's always, many things to.
That's so beautiful what you just said.
Thank you.
And in terms of, we don't really ask ourselves how we feel in these places. That really makes us think we want some more water.
That's I think might have some more. Thank you.
Some water.
Thank you.
So to make sure you're feeling your well-being doesn't suffer.
Hydrated. Yeah. No, that's a great thing. I think we generally don't ask ourselves how we feel in any circumstances, whether it's in our home or in our daily lives. It's very, very rare, very rarely that somebody will ask you, how do you feel? Instead of how are you? It's always like, how are you? Everybody says, oh, I'm great, and nobody says, how do you feel?
Or if you go to, for example, to explore a new space, maybe you're thinking about, probably what people have on their minds is like, how do I like it, right? In terms of just exterior or visually, and not how does it make me feel, or how am I feeling in this space.
Exactly. And this, what I'm loving about this this approach to design is that one of my favorite things in terms of my field of work is talking to people. I love talking to people, and I'm very fortunate to have clients from many different countries, many different cultures, and ages, everything, family structures, and I just love listening to how people live. That's always been like my favorite thing, is like listening to people, and then from there, coming up with a proposed, design project for them. With this, it's amazing because it's like everyone who's coming to me now for this kind of design, they all have something to say about, like, I'm not sleeping well. I can't work in my home office, or, if it's an office, if it's a big office space, team isn't feeling creative, or, we need the team to be more aligned. They need to be more connected. There's it's endless, the list of things that, that people share with this, what people share of, it's always about something that has to do with feeling.
Very, very interesting. Yeah. But the awareness obviously is there, which I find very encouraging. Yeah. And do you believe that there's always something we can do about the space we're in, or is maybe sometimes the solution to give up on the space, if it's a physical space or an environment, also move away?
Well, I want to say that yes, it's I'm going to say 99% of the times
you can.
It's just working with the same space. Because if somebody has that space, nobody's going to say to you, okay, what do you think about this space? Because if you don't like it, I'm just going to go, and buy on the other street. Nobody's going to say that to you. So, there's always things that can be improved and can be worked with, no matter how big or small, or there's always things to work with. And actually, one of the things that I'm also very interested in is that I've noticed is that I think the people who have the most interest in this kind of approach are people who actually do live in huge homes and have all of these incredible things. And it's just, there's something about the flow of the energy that's just not, it's not good. And so nobody feels at home, and nobody, everybody's always going out looking for things, experiences out of their homes or out of their spaces that, they could actually have in their office, in their, it's interesting how I think the more people have, the more they feel the need of, changing something for a feeling rather than a look.
Oh, very, very interesting. This is so deep. Yeah. And can you actually enter a space? And again, I'm talking a physical space without scanning for energy and everything, or is that something you kind of always do?
Well, there's two different things. I mean, in terms of like walking into this space, I think we all have this ability to walk into a space and say, wow, this space has an amazing energy. Or, oh my God, I need to leave this space because it doesn't feel good, right? So I think most of us have that ability to, or we've had experiences where we feel one or the other. And so I haven't had many situations where like I'll walk into a space and it's like that I feel a highly negative energy. Most of the spaces actually either feel quite neutral or a little bit mixed energy, but things that can be worked with. So if it's just a simple design approach, then that's one thing. And then if it needs to, if it's beneficial to harmonize energy, to elevate the quality of the energy of the space, then that has to be, measured and then just it has to be designed around that to improve it.
Understand. And is it true, my assumption that you said that you had been working in a certain way for some years, right? And you lost a bit of your purpose or your sense of purpose. Has that now come back with?
Oh, totally. Totally. It's just that before, it gets to a point where things just seem too frivolous for me. And it's just more things and it's more stuff and it's more stuff and more things. And then, there's always that client who wants a certain object, only because their friends have never seen it before. And only because of, it's the latest thing. No, only because nobody else has it. There's always this thing about others and not thinking about how, we want those things for our own experience, and not necessarily for others. So, as you can imagine, with interior design, it's quite easy, to get caught into this materialistic, frivolous sort of thing. And I mean, it's beautiful, and I love, designing spaces. But I've always enjoyed more the experience of spaces, rather than just purely the visual. Like, for example, if imagine a restaurant project. For me, what's interesting about that is just, understanding who are going to be the clients, how much time are they going to spend, what is coming out of the kitchen, how much, what's the business structure, how can the interior design be part of the business analysis, how can, do we want people sitting in chairs for 3 hours, or do we need them to just sit for 2 or for 1? Or, if it's for 4 hours, that chair has to be super comfortable. They have to be, they have to feel good. So, yeah, it's
I'm just
different
realizing
things.
how comfortable I feel in this chair. Understand. Now, in terms of you designing this, you seem to have a really holistic approach, but also that you really dive deep into it, right? Is that you mainly? Do you work with a team? And or where do you see technology come in here? And is it maybe possible soon that, technology can help us with the design of such spaces?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so I'm from a generation where, technology wasn't like our biggest thing in terms of designing. And obviously now we have all these tools. And I'm just, forever fascinated with things, like IKEA has this amazing thing that I just discovered a few days ago where, you can scan an empty room and then just place IKEA things in there. And you can see what it looks like. It's a fabulous tool. I think in terms of my mythology, I don't see it possible to be designed digitally or created digitally. I don't see it that way. I think, it's just not just myself, but other people who design in this kind of way. It's a very personal approach. So I don't see that being possible to be programmed. And there's so many different aspects from it, from the design to the more the scientific approach and things. I can't see that being possible to be done digitally. And in terms of teams, so it depends on what I'm working on. I allocate specific teams for each project, depending on the project. Nowadays, I've been doing more and more consulting. So the consulting work I do one-to-one with my clients myself, and I'll do that for as long as I can, because it's the only way to get to know the situation and to create something for that. And then just for general projects, it just depends on what's going on and just allocating teams for specific things. So, if it's, it just depends on what's happening and where. I was working on a project last year in Paris, and we were just the team came together. And there's people locally, but there's also people here from Lisbon that had to be flying out for doing certain tasks. So it just depends on what the project is.
Go one by one. Yeah. In terms of your own creativity and energy, are there moments where you sometimes feel like now you are a bit lost or you don't have that energy? How do you navigate
in terms
that?
of my own creativity?
And energy that it seems to me like you're putting a lot into it, right? I mean, nice, beautiful humanness that you put into everything, but you also need to make sure that you're full to give that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've learned along the years to let go of this expectation that you press a button and things just come out, right? It doesn't happen with anybody who works in any kind of creative field. So, you might have a full day where you have absolutely no idea. And then, you go to bed and you wake up at 3:00 in the morning and it's like, wow, this is it, and this is the idea. What's been interesting with these latest projects that I've been working on is that most of everything, all the creative ideas, all of the designs and things come to me when I'm actually on location on the project. So definitely there's this connectedness with the projects and the nature and the setting. And I've been lucky because these most recent projects have been in incredible locations surrounded by, beautiful nature. So it helps in terms of the connectivity, and nature obviously fosters also creativity.
Yeah.
So it's just it's like one thing just sort of like builds up on the other. So I'm not like, if I need to develop something for a client, I sort of allocate a time for it, but I don't expect to like in the next 3 hours come up with an idea. So it's rather like, if I say to someone, I'll get back to you next week. I might have that brilliant idea, the day before, or I might have it instantly, it's going to depend on, how it comes. I don't, it's
a flow there.
It's a flow,
and the process that you allow yourself to go through. Beautiful.
It's just letting go of the, we really cannot plan everything, in any aspect of life. And this is just, there's things that cannot be planned. I cannot plan. I cannot say, okay, I'm going to like do this in the morning, and in the afternoon, I'm going to have that bright idea for that project wherever. It just doesn't happen that way, because it's always going to be when we are in the most
unexpected
environments, at least that's my experience, that the best ideas come,
and again, environments.
And again, it's like, I think a lot of my ideas in the past are just like when I'm like on an airplane and I can't look at anything and I can't do anything except just like my notebook and just taking notes or something. And then, you have all these things just flow. There's no distractions, and things. So again, just going into nature also is something that's quite inspiring for this, because, you allow for less distractions and just things just, you start looking around and, there's so many different things in nature to take inspiration from, and whether it's an experience or a visual or,
Yeah, and with your experience, you also trust that you will get to that, right, over time. Now, we mentioned experiences, so I would like to ask you, is there any first-time experience for yourself that you have coming up or you would like to create?
Oh, coming up. Okay. Coming up, I can't think of anything right now. But they're always normally quite more or less last minute. So, yeah.
So you trust that the first times will come. Is there something you would want to maybe happen as a first time?
I can't really think of anything right now, but I can tell you like things that I've done that I never thought I would do. So, I got my boating license. I got my scuba diving license and all these things that I absolutely never thought I would do. So yeah, I just take whatever. And podcasts, this is the first one. So this is also a first.
So there will be a first release of a podcast with Teresa. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Reggie.
In our space today.
It's amazing. It's really, really nice to be here and to talk with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. If you liked today's episode, it would mean the world to us if you like it and share it with friends, family, or anyone who could need a boost in courage. We would also love to hear from you. What are your reflections, your passions, your dreams? Share them with us in the comments. And let's keep creating powerful, healthy firsts together. I'll see you next first time. Until then, much love and courage. Ciao.